Okay guys, today I just want to go over a really quick explanation of how to make your own chalk paint using your latex wall paint. It's actually pretty easy. It's hard to mess it up, in fact. For this, you're just going to need your latex wall paint and some plaster of Paris. You can find this in the paint department usually for Lowe's, Home Depot, any of your hardware stores. So first, let's talk about the latex wall paint. I have mixed my own chalk paint using lots of different brands. This is Behr. I've used a Kills brand, I've used the Sherwin-Williams, I've used Benjamin Moore. They all work really well with mixing it into chalk paint. The thing is that different latex brands are different consistencies. So some are a little bit thicker than others, and all that means is that you probably have to add a little bit more water to make the paint the consistency you want for spreading it onto furniture, painting it onto furniture. Finding the consistency you like is going to be a little bit of gut and what you like. I have used it where I've put a little bit too much water in and it's a little bit runny, but it works just as well. It probably just means that you have to apply a little bit more to get full coverage or to get the paint color even across the whole furniture piece. I will say the easy thing about chalk paint is when you're mixing it yourself with latex paint is you can always add in a little bit more paint if you feel like you got it too thin, a little bit more plaster of Paris because this is actually going to thicken it up. Or if you feel like you've got it too thick, then you just add a little bit more water. So it doesn't have to be an exact recipe. You can play around with it and tweak it a bit. So I've poured a little bit of the plaster of Paris into the bottom of this cup. This is probably a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be an exact science, but it's not much for right now. And this is probably about a cup of latex paint. Again, I'm just eyeballing it. It doesn't have to be exact. If you can see, the plaster of Paris has kind of like little balls. I like to break these up before I actually add in the hot tap water. This just keeps it from having too many little chunks of hard plaster inside of your chalk paint. That's not going to mess up your chalk paint. It will just mean something that you'll have to either sand off or remove before the paint dries. So now I'm going to add hot tap water. So what I usually do with the plaster of Paris lately is about equal parts plaster of Paris and hot tap water. Okay, you want to use hot tap water to mix your plaster of Paris just because it's going to help that plaster of Paris dissolve better. So what you want is to get a milky in color consistency. It doesn't have to be perfect again. I don't want you guys to get confused and think that you have to make it exactly a certain way. I've just added a couple of tablespoons of hot tap water. Actually, that's probably 3 or 4 tablespoons. And I'm just mixing it up to get all the balls, the hard, chunky bits of plaster of Paris. There aren't really that many in here. I don't even see any right now. But again, this just makes it easier and smoother consistency. So now you can see it's as thin as water, but it's got a milky in color appearance to it. It's all mixed up. Now I'm going to take that latex wall paint and just pour some of this in. Again, here I'm just going with my gut as far as consistency. So I think I'll probably end up using all of it in this batch. Again, if I felt like I made this too thin, I could always mix up a little bit more plaster of Paris with hot water, but in a thicker consistency, and add it to the paint, and that will thicken up the paint. In fact, over the next 4 or 5 minutes, this paint is going to get a little bit thicker than it is at the moment. For some reason, when you add the mixture to the paint, it takes a little bit of time and it will actually thicken up a bit more. So after 4 or 5 minutes, you might just need to add a little bit more tap water. In fact, if it's a little bit too thick, just whatever you do, add a little bit of everything at a time. That way you don't have to backtrack too much and just wait a few minutes and see what happens. But right now, this is a really good consistency. It's a little bit thin, but it's gonna thicken up a bit. Just enough so that it's easy to spread and not dripping all over the place. And the whole reason, you might be wondering why anybody would want to mix their latex paint into chalk paint for furniture. The great thing about chalk paint is it cures really fast. That means you can paint it on and it'll be dry a lot faster than it would if it was just latex paint, and it will harden faster than latex paint. I have used, when I first painted my first piece of furniture a long time ago, I used trim paint to do it, not knowing what would happen. And it took 3 months for the paint to actually harden on the top of the dresser that I painted. I could put my fingernail down on that top and it would leave it indent. So whenever I left like lamps or anything on top of that dresser that I painted, it left indents. So mixing that into chalk paint would have meant that I could use it within a couple days and it would have been fine. The other great thing about chalk paint is that you can sand it, which is great for distressing furniture anytime you want to have a layered paint effect or just reveal a little bit of stain underneath paint. So whenever I want to sand paints, I definitely want to mix it or use store-bought chalk paint because it's just a little bit drier and it sands nicely without peeling. If you try to sand latex wall paint as it is, it's probably going to peel because it has sort of a plasticky texture when left alone. Okay, let's talk about Sheen in your latex paint real quick. I think this works best with eggshell Sheen, flat Sheen, or the one that's in between. I can't remember what they call it off the top of my head, but sort of the medium Sheen and lower, it looks the best. I have done this with satin or trim paint Sheen, so it's the shinier Sheen, and it works. It works as chalk paint, but I think it looks better when it's eggshell or below. But if you have a color that you really love of trim paint, and you want to just use it for your furniture, give it a go. You can always mix your higher Sheen paints with the plaster of Paris, make your own chalk paint and put it on a test board to see for yourself whether or not you like it. And I think it would look better for the higher Sheens if you use a polyacrylic on top of the paint, or maybe even General Finishes flat out flat. So that'll put that flat finish on that looks really pretty and probably hide that sort of shiny sheen that chalk paint mixed with trim paint can have sometimes. You can store this. I usually just grab a mason jar and put it in, put the lid on tight, and this will stay, it will eventually start to dry out. This will stay good for probably 4 or 5 months in a mason jar. That's about it for everything you need to know about mixing your own chalk paint. I'll put a link in the description below to some of my furniture painting videos so you can check out how I've used this and inspiration for how to paint your furniture at home. Good luck, guys.